so much for everyone for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. Al, this is kind of like a little bit of role reversal. Usually I'm on Pafao, and this time you're in a QuestionPro hosted webinar. So I love
I love it
it.
too. Yeah, I get to answer questions and try and bring some insight with you. And there's a
Yes.
facilitator, you doing the heavy lifting. So
Yeah.
make
And
it
I'll
happen.
do like my best, my best effort to do that because you and I have tried different formats where like you've hosted me properly and I've been the speaker, and then we've had our idea share. We're both equally talking. Somehow though, because you're so good at what you do, you still ask me a lot of the questions. I'm like,
Guilty,
wait a minute. This is more of
guilty.
the conversation. It's not the one-way dialogue. So before we get into a content, and hopefully we have a lot of good stuff for all of you joining us today, Al, would you please kindly introduce yourself for, the maybe few people who don't know you?
Well, I thank you for having me, Sanya. And yeah, it's an important topic, and I am trying to hone my narrative around how I come across, because as I've shared for years, I'm a dad first and foremost, and I identified as that because my kids were kids. Now my kids are, I have a young man in my life, 22, and a young daughter who's 19, going on 20, or at least 20. But they have been a guiding light in doing what I do. And so to answer your question, I'm the founder and CEO of Pafao People Analytics and Future of Work. We have a community conference, learning experiences, and a variety of other assets. Some of these videos that you and I have done over the years that help people, both leaders and practitioners, and those interested just simply in how people, data and analytics, and AI are going to affect the future of work, to better understand the use cases, as well as the research, as well as the ideas that are emerging, so we can promote what I call people data for good, the ethical and responsible use of people data, analytics, and AI for the benefit of individuals first and foremost, teams, groups, including diversity groups, organizations, and society at large. And broader arc, I'm a former practitioner, so I created the capability of gapping in the early 2000s. I was with a tech company. I was created peer groups, and I've had a very fortunate career, but I've been focused on this space for 20 years now. It's actually 2002 was my first year in like really doing quote unquote human capital analytics, but I'm a consummate learner, and that's part of what we're going to do here today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that introduction. And every time you talk, it inspires me. And I love that you always say that you're a dad first. So I'm a newer mom, not so new anymore, but Mateo is 4 years old. And goodness, like when I think about the world and when I think about possibilities, for those of us who are working today, but especially for the next generations, like I love to let my mind run wild and think about what are the incredible things that each one of us and our kids can do, with their careers. How can we completely reshape the world? How can we completely reshape the world that we have so much empathy and compassion for each other, that we want to elevate one another, that we truly celebrate each other's successes and truly come together to help each other, to help our organizations, to help our communities. And to me, I'm an organizational psychologist. I am a president of the workforce business unit at QuestionPro. And I'm somebody that's probably had a quite unconventional life, maybe, and a bit of an unconventional career path. So I was born and raised in Belgrade, Serbia. I moved to the US when I was 12 years old, lived there for 20 some years, lived for a bit of my life in London, and then moved to Argentina. And right now I'm in Buenos Aires. And so if any of you are wondering, like, why in the world, why is this woman wearing a tank top? It's actually, for those of you in Celsius, 36 degrees. For those of you in Fahrenheit, I think like 97. So we're going into summer, so it's warm. But to me, the reason why I mentioned that is because my personal story too is that I've always followed what I love to do for my career, but I've always followed what I love to do personally as well. And whether it was, moving to Europe because I wanted to live there, whether it was falling in love and moving to Argentina and taking a chance, in this different place, not knowing the language, but I am a firm believer that we can shape our own destiny, that we can shape how satisfied we are with what we do, how fulfilled we feel. Some days it's really hard and some days it's easier, but I want to believe that each and every one of us and each and one of the people that we lead, we can do that, and that it will get easier to do that in the future. That maybe these conversations are going to be a little bit different, and we'll be sharing how, interesting our trajectory is, how interesting our career is and life path is, but more because it's fun to know, not because it's so like, wow, I can't believe you did that, and how did you manage, etc. And so in our day-to-day work at QuestionPro, and in my passion personally too, we work with organizations to really help them better connect with their employees and truly understand what it is that they're looking for out of the organization. What kind of promise can they make to their people? And then how do you really create this phenomenal culture and phenomenal community where you lift each other, right? Because if a person loves what they do, and if they love the people that they're with, they will give it their all. And if the organization has that vested interest, they'll create a space where these individuals are going to thrive. And it's not forever, right? We're looking at the data. We know that a person's not going to be in an organization their entire career. I don't even think we want to strive towards that, because there's too many interesting things to do out there. There's too much different kind of impact to make. But how can we create a space that when an individual is there, they truly feel valued, they feel seen, they feel heard, and they absolutely love the time that they spend there. And when they move on somewhere else, that they leave with nothing but good feelings and good experiences. And so that's really, like, again, my personal calling and why I love being in QuestionPro, because I do feel like through employee listening and through connecting with employees in a really profound way, organizations can create that space. So without further ado, we do have some slides ready. So sometimes for those of you who know me and Al, we can jump on and chat for like 30 to 45 minutes and maybe no slides. But today we do have some slides, because what we're hoping for is that really all of you are going to, walk away with different learnings. And that, oh, wait, no, hold on. Wrong screen. One more. I can do this. I can do this. Um, and so we'll go through the different takeaways. We'll give you an overview. One of the things that we'll do as well is tell you a little bit around who this webinar is really targeted towards, and then also maybe who it might not be the best fit for. And the reason I say that is that both Al and I are so fortunate to really have a phenomenal network of people in our circles of, who you're on this webinar, and that depending on where you are, you might be a different part in your journey. So you might be doing employee listening, but saying, you know what, I know I can be doing this better, and how do I do this better? And I'd love to get more ideas. I'd love to get more opinions. Or you might be somebody that has a very robust people analytics team. And so one of the things that I just want to mention as we get in, like, if you're somebody that has a people analytics team and you've got like super robust surveys going and you've got behavioral data in there and all this stuff, you'll probably learn something, but I don't know if you're going to walk away saying like, wow, this was mind blowing. I have these completely different new models and concepts that I can walk away with and try. You're still more than welcome to stick around. But again, I just wanted to be clear, because we are in these different parts of the journey. But again, if you're somebody who's surveying employees, you're not like, you feel like, oh, I know I could be doing more. What should I be focusing on? How do I operationalize this? Then this webinar is exactly for you. So wanted to mention that and jump into the data point slightly out of order. But why are we having also this conversation today? So the title, as all of you know, because you signed up, is how to keep your best people during a chaotic labor market. And we're going to talk about retention. And so as Elle and I were preparing for this, one of the things that we mentioned is, gosh, like so many organizations, like unfortunately are going through layoffs and there's downsizing. Is there a space to talk about this? Is this really still a concern in the market? And again, QuestionPro being a market research company as well, I said, let's ask. Let's go out there and ask workers, do you plan to change jobs? How big of a fear, or what kind of kind of impact are these announcements of layoffs having on people? And actually, for both of us and for the people that we shared this information with prior to the webinar, um, it was a little surprising that more than 1 in 3 workers plan to change jobs in the next 6 months, and they plan to change jobs voluntarily. Now that they're saying, I think I'll be in a different job because I'm worried that I'll be laid off, they're actually saying I'm going to be proactive about this. And so to me, this said a couple of things. One, to justify, and we ran this before we scheduled the webinar, just so we're clear, because we wanted to make sure that we are well informed on what's going on in the market and we use everybody's time wisely. Um, but to me, one of the things that we talk about often is, again, that passion and what organization you're in. Where do you feel like you can make a big difference? And I'm a firm believer that really, no matter what's happening in the market, if your heart's not in your role, if for whatever reason you think, I've really given it my all and I would love to make this work, but for whatever reason it's not, or I don't feel respected, quite frankly, or I don't feel valued, it's important to talk to your network. It's important to think about what else is out there. None of us should feel prisoners of our role. I know sometimes it's easier said than done. I'm not saying for everyone, go quit your job, you'll find something, don't have a safety net. Some people don't have the luxury to do that because we need to put the food on the table, we need to pay the bills, but certainly to be open, and talk to your network about opportunities, because you should always try to be in a job that you feel valued and appreciated and passionate about is important. Now, Al, I'm looking at you, and you, my friend, have been all over the US. You've been all over Europe, talking with people, talking with organizations, talking with employees. Like, what are you like on the ground? What is some of the sentiment that you're seeing and hearing globally? Like, we have data, we ran a survey, right? Um, what are some of the anecdotal things that you've been seeing?
Well, yeah, as we go, as your listener, by all means, ask questions in the chat, because thank you for setting the stage for, the purpose and the key takeaways, Sanya, because I think it's really important to understand the value of creating an ongoing dialogue with your workforce. And what does that mean? We talk about employee listening, we talk about employee surveys, there's fear of over surveying. I'm sure you've heard of lack of action fatigue, as opposed to survey fatigue. All these things are all fine and good and very appropriate. However, we need, as analysts, as HR leaders, as people leaders, we need to be insatiably curious about how people are thinking, feeling, and behaving within our sphere of influence. If we take even this data set and, okay, 1 in 3 workers are willing and able, and in fact thinking about leaving over the next 6 months, that might be spot on. It also might be way short of the reality. It might be less than the reality, depending on the job, family, geography, and a variety of other variables. But the key takeaway is you have to create this systematic way to gather their perspective and ideas and their feelings on an ongoing basis, much more frequently than I believe many are comfortable. And again, I want to leverage this point that I want to be asked questions. I don't mind being in a dialogue with you, Sanya, over the course of, this 50 minutes or so. We're going to learn from each other.
Yeah.
But that's predicated on this insatiable curiosity and willingness to learn, and in turn, take appropriate action. So, final thing I'll say, because you touched on it at the outset, there are different experiences that we're going to have as we go over time. And we have this external environment right now with inflation that's creating high anxiety. So I want to be confident and I want to be comfortable. So confidence is my organization going to succeed? Am I going to have career growth opportunities here? And the comfort is really, do I have relationships that I value, that I want to be around these people, that I believe and trust in, that are going to help us weather this storm? And this leverages Sean Akers' research, and the happiness advantage. Number one attribute of happy and successful people is the quality of their support system. I just saw another research about happiness at the end of their days. It's about relationships. So, organizations, HR, and leaders in general can serve as facilitators of healthy relationships, particularly with hybrid work. So there's so much opportunity there, but we have to understand where those opportunities are. And that's what employee listening is all about. So, Sanya, I apologize for getting on my soapbox, but I just wanted to
No.
here at the outset.
That was great. And I took notes. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, jumping into again some practical things like what can you do? What are the key areas that we're seeing? Um, the first one is choosing an area of focus. So there are a lot of different things that organizations can survey on, right? There are a lot of different things that we can ask our people about. But for you to take a step back and understand what is most valuable to me, what is it that our organization values? What is it? What ties to my company values, for example? So each one of us talks about, each organization is unique. And a lot of times, this is one of Al's and my favorite topics, but we won't go into it now, is benchmarking and comparing ourselves to others. And one of the really tough things for me when it comes to comparing our organization with others is that each of one of us is unique as an organization. And each one of us makes a promise to our employees, whether it's through employee value proposition, whether it's through our values, through our mission, of what they're going to get out of our organization. And employees choose different companies based on that. Like, I love being a QuestionPro because of what it stands. I would probably love being at some other organizations. And you know what? There are probably some that I wouldn't because they don't align with what I value as a person. They don't maybe align with my value of thinking. It doesn't mean they're bad companies. It just means they're not a good fit for me. And so when we think about what do we want to ask our people about, how well are we doing? I'm a huge proponent of looking in the mirror and saying, what did I promise to people when they came in? What did I say as far as the experience that are going to get here, and are they? And that is going to be different for each organization. So when you're thinking about the many different things that you could focus on, I would highly advocate looking in the mirror and asking yourself that. Now, are there some themes that are coming up in the market that are important to look at? Absolutely. And a lot of them are maybe less traditional than what we thought about before. Before, maybe we would think about, pay and benefits and bonuses, still all incredibly important. But when you look at a lot of research, well-being comes up as an important concept. Now, that might not be your value proposition in an organization. We've seen some organizations in the media, that are saying, we're going to need you to work X number of hours. Good for them. They're putting it out there, but people could self-select themselves out and say, that's just not what I'm looking for. But we're also seeing an increasing number of organizations saying that this is important to me. But what's interesting is a lot of organizations are still figuring out, how do I do it? What does that mean? What is it that my employees need? So I want well-being. I want mental well-being, physical well-being, spiritual well-being to be a priority. But if I promise that to my employees, what does that look like for them? And that's Al, to your point, where that dialogue comes in. The same thing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some best practices around that, but depending on the kind of organization you are, whether people have to be physically in offices, whether people are working remotely, and how they connect and how they communicate, you can measure a lot of these things very differently. So those would be my two pieces of advice when you're thinking about, now we're finishing the year. A lot of organizations do a big survey at the beginning of the year. And when you're thinking about, my goodness, there's so many things that I can ask about. I can't possibly ask my employees to take, 3 hours to answer a survey. Don't. But reflect on what it is, who is it that you want to be, very much like you might like an individual. So Al and I know each other very well. We're really good friends. In many ways, we're similar, but in many ways, we're very different. He's a phenomenal volleyball player. I don't remember last time I touched a volleyball. Just one example. And so for me, if I measured myself on how good of a volleyball player I was, I would feel awful because I'm bad, but it's not a part of my identity. And so I think we need to remember when it comes to organizations to really do that work and be true to ourselves to say, what is it? Who is it that I am? What is it that I stand for? Do we need to change that? Because a lot of times people will ask me, we've had these organizational values for a long time. Can we change it? Oh, of course you can. it's the same thing as humans. Like, we're not the same people we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We evolve, we grow, and we change. But it's important to do that work and do that reflection around who are we? What do we want to stand for? And then how do we know if we're doing well with that? Al, what have you seen as, again, as companies, start to do that work? What are some things that you're seeing in the market? Maybe some particularly, like, I feel like this is something really important to focus on in general across the board. I feel like everyone should focus on it. And or what could maybe be some unique and differentiators that you think organizations could pick out?
Well, a few things before I answer that question pointedly. And I think if I'm listening to you and or us, and I'm thinking about how this can relate to me and my organization, and if you're a change agent, whether that be an HR business partner or an analyst or someone who's running employee surveys or even in communications, for example, there's this notion, to your point, if we have an employee value proposition that we have been communicating for people who have just been hired within, say, the past half year or year, that promise needs to be delivered on. A colleague of mine shared this with me, which was super healthy for me. Expectation violation. Expectation violation is bad.
Mm,
And it creates this feeling
yeah,
of distrust and anxiety. It's like, okay, they promised this and they didn't deliver on that. Therefore, what else are they not going to deliver on? And that erodes confidence, and confidence, lack thereof, will inform my behavior that, I might
yeah,
leave the organization if I don't have that level of trust. So expectation violation. The other thing that I want to call out, where you have all these constructs here, and this might seem self-serving for you in QuestionPro, but I believe it regardless of what tool you use. There is a role for an expert survey designer. Because there are the notion of reference. We say, I feel respected at work. Is that by your team, media manager, leadership? There's so many ways to
yeah,
craft a question, the scales, the measurements that come out that will provide the insights that in turn you can take action on. So what I have seen, unfortunately, particularly with small to mid-sized companies, and this can be up to 5,000 people, they try and do it on a shoestring. They'll just grab something off the shelf in terms of a survey. They might have some normative data or not, but they won't ask questions that are truly getting at what's needed to be understood in their organization at that point in time. So there needs to be some conscious crafting of this
yeah,
dialogue, of these questions, because the questions that you ask actually matter. They, in
yeah,
and of themselves, show what you're caring about. And
yeah,
if you're caring about their emotional well-being, psychological well-being, physical well-being, there needs to be questions around that. And
yeah,
last thing I'll say on this, which I think is emerging as a leading practice, it's not only about the surveys. It's call it digital focus groups, where you're
hmm,
actually getting deeper understanding of the insights that you find in the surveys. And that can be as simple as a call like this, or it could be more
yeah,
systematic instruction. But at the end of the day, if you're going to take action, particularly around a system or process that's going to have an impact at scale, you should be pretty damn confident that's a good decision, and you should
yeah.
have basis for that decision, a data-informed decision at that. So, that's where not only I believe, but I'm seeing in what I would call leading practice companies, and again, I'll package it in this way: appropriate data, appropriate questions, appropriate data. Okay, data isn't going to just materialize out of thin air, and that really takes an understanding of the experience you want to create as an employer, as a leader, and making sure that your questions align with that.
Absolutely. Um, Thank you for that. I do agree that really thinking through how to ask something and what you want to get out of it is hugely important. And it's almost like in a dialogue, like if you're having it with a friend, with a colleague, with a significant other, how do you ask a question in such a way to make that person feel comfortable, to be vulnerable, to truly share what they feel, but also to ask it in such a way that when they answer, you feel like you have clarity on how they feel, not that you're like, "Ooh, wait, I didn't ask that right because I still don't get it," and then do a follow up. So I definitely agree with that. And then just in some thinking about analyzing the data, what you do, these are some of the basics, but I put a couple of slides in here because I thought it was important to touch on, at least when you have this conversation when you look at the information, and then how do you take action on it? And we'll talk a little bit more about it in subsequent sections. But historically, and I think some organizations, a good number still do this based on resources, is you go to HR and you look to that specific team of people that's never big enough. It's never big enough to do everything that they can because there's so much to do always, and say, okay, you ran the survey. What are you going to do with the data? And it's like, well, it's not a me, it's a we. But with that, I do think that there are a few different things that I've seen work successfully. A lot of times in an organization, you'll see company-wide themes. Like it's not like, oh, different things are happening in different departments and it's just chaos and there's no consistency. A lot of times there's an area, like for example, in this instance, well-being, that's an opportunity across the organization. And so you dig into that and you see, what can we do as an organization? What does this mean? What items did we not score well on? And then what are some ideas we can have for action that we can experiment with company-wide, because we see that this is a company-wide problem. Also, more often than not, we do see some systematic differences, whether it's by department, by geography. And so to me, to be able to have a strategy where you're both leading organization-wide initiatives, but also empowering whoever is the head of that department, location, all the way down to manager level, but looking at different levels to say, this is how your people are feeling. And this is where you can have a huge difference. Here are some ideas for what you can do. Let's work together for you to really bring this to life. I think that's incredibly important, because I think as long as we as organizations continue to look to just HR departments to do that, this is where I don't think I will put my money on it. I believe we will never, ever be able to take effective action on all the data that we want to. We'll be able to take some action, but the resources, and to borrow your word, capacity that we need to really make that substantial change can't sit with a few people. So that's why when I was thinking about, what are the concepts and then how do you look at the data, certainly think about organization-wide initiatives, because again, more often than not, there are going to be systematic things that can be approved across the board, and then start to go in however your organization is set up and empower these individuals to make that change. Help them. Because again, you might look at head of customer success and say, hey, your team is scoring low on relationships and low on developing people. We think it's important for you to prove it. Okay, great. How? Well, what do I do? Like, can you help me with that? So I think in that sense that people in culture teams, HR teams, employee experience teams can be phenomenal strategic partners, but we have to move towards the idea that each one of us can make a big difference. Now, I would argue that it's down to each individual contributor, how we treat somebody. To your point, you talked about relationships before, and I'm really emotional this week. I don't know what's going on, but like I literally started like kind of like getting teary-eyed, because it has infinite impact on how people feel. And I don't think that we as humans realize that in every single interaction with somebody else, we have this phenomenal opportunity to build somebody's confidence up, to make them feel good, that you don't have to be a manager of a team. You don't have to be a leader of a business unit, that we all need to take an opportunity with that. Now with managers and the roles that they're inherently in, they generally have resources and the ability to make that even greater impact. So again, we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go on, but I just really, really wanted to stress that as you go into next year, as you think about this. Hopefully a lot of you are doing this already. But again, I think oftentimes there's still that mentality around, this is the team that's responsible for these kinds of initiatives, and we'll look to them for that. And it doesn't mean that HR teams still can't be phenomenal champions, but again, to really create this change, you're going to need a lot more people, because capacity wise, it's just impossible to act on all the insights, no matter even how big or short the survey is. All of you know that have done it before and looked at data, that you've had more information than you could do something with. Al, you look like you want to say something, so I'm going to turn over the mic to you before we go to the next section.
I do. It's So I just had a light go out right here. So I'd
We
have to
can't
talk.
tell. You're good.
But here's the thing I wanted to pick up on based on what you shared. And I'm really curious about this on the future of people or talent strategy, workforce planning, or whatever you want to call it. There is fantastic literature in the popular press from the likes of Brene Brown, Adam Grant, on down the line, Simon Sinek, down the line. It is fantastic. The realities of most businesses, however, does not create the situations where those kind of key learnings can exist. After all, we're just individuals, and we have certain limited capabilities and capacity to influence a larger system. And so my hope is the kind of knowing doing gap, as popular psychology and popular business leading practices emerge. How can organizations, how can leaders adapt and accommodate, things like focus, things like energy? We are energy. We transfer energy. We do it virtually. We do it in person. It's just a matter of fact. So, how then can we do that consciously as an employer? So it's not just transactional and we're overworked, underappreciated, and people want to bail. So to think about that, I think is a really healthy thing to do. The other thing that I'll just say, and I'll toss it back to you, is that as we go through time here, there is this, and this is the title of the session here, around labor markets and talent markets. So what's happening in the external environment matters. People know it. Employees know it to some extent, whether it be through Instagram or the news channel that they get, so they know that if there is tightness in their particular job family and in their particular industry, they know if other employers are creating better value propositions and higher levels of trust and truly taking appropriate action. So the cost, and this is the takeaway, of not doing this work, of not listening to your employees, of not understanding the talent markets in which you're doing business, is frankly unacceptably high. And if I'm investing or sitting on a board of a business, there's no justification as to why that's not being done, unless there's absolutely no cash and the business is about to go under. It's just, but bar that, it needs to happen, and it needs to happen very thoughtfully. And that's where a governance body comes in, around talent acquisition, learning, comp, rewards, all that stuff. And I would say we're on a 2 to 3, maybe 4 in terms of our maturity, in terms of operating models of where we're going to be over the next 2 to 3 years. So there's a lot of room for growth is the key takeaway.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you say that, because on the one hand, I think hearing that it's a 2 or 3 can be scary. But to me, who gets scared of low data, I actually saw it as very optimistic and very positive, because if that's where we are, the opportunity for growth is phenomenal. And the businesses coming in this area, we're just talking about this earlier this week, is just so incredibly encouraging to see the kind of information that's out there, and the kind of information that people can have access to, and how we can be differently informed. And I think we only still, to your point, even know a fraction of what's available today. And even what's available for organizations to get their hands on, I think is phenomenal, and there's still a great opportunity. So I'm a very optimistic and very hopeful, to your point, around all the ways that we can advance and where we are on the scale, and that there's still like, wow, we haven't arrived, right? Because sometimes I think when you feel like I've done it all, or everything's available that there is, to me that's more discouraging, because then what's next?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, what I shared hopefully is a bit of a challenge, and also an invitation to step into that opportunity. That really needs to happen. I just realized I ripped my jacket. Sorry about that.
You're very small on the screen, so the things that you might notice, I think we know.
Yeah, I probably
The
shouldn't
light
even call it
going out, the jacket, you're good.
It's my cufflink. Yeah, and I'll just add, and I'll just throw this in just as a teaser. I'm in Oslo, so it's 6 degrees Celsius, 21 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And Pat, to your earlier point, and Tanya, to your earlier question about volleyball, I actually played volleyball this evening in a former bomb shelter in here in the Oslo area, and I rode my friend's bicycle there in the snow. And I say this just for it's not bragging. What it is I'm going there, and we started a little after 5, and there was 24, 25 men, in there, playing this game. And, I'm like, where did you all come from? And so they're from all over the Oslo area. Sometimes it takes quite a while to get there, but they're making a commitment. And I'm like, didn't your boss, say, hey, it's not a big deal. It's something that culturally is embedded into kind of the well-being model, before they were even calling it well-being. There are boundaries. And, I'm very curious in different cultures, what engagement, looks like. My working hypothesis is not only is about relationships, is that, you and I have talked about this, is discretionary time. So I can use my time to play volleyball. I can use time to be with my kids, and if that is not being afforded, and if that's not being investigated as an opportunity to improve, then, how are you going to know that? So anyway, I love being in different cultures, because I am like any survey or analyst. I'm asking questions, because it's a different system. So hopefully that, creates a bit of a narrative or anecdote to inspire. Hey, if you're in a new organization, even if you've been in the same one for 10 years, the underlying currents have changed. The external environment certainly has changed, so keep asking, stay in that dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So fast forward a little bit to go through some of the employee life cycle areas of focus. So we can have this conversation in many different ways and many different touch points. And so today, for the sake of time, we just chose to focus on 3 that we thought were particularly interesting ones. So it'll be onboarding, pulse, and exit. And so what was interesting with onboarding too is, again, we were mentioning layoffs, changes in the different market, but here we're providing just some external data on just the incredible importance of onboarding in the organization. And for a lot of you who are in this area, you've probably seen something similar. But to me, I think when we're looking to convince more people in the organization, whether it's for involvement or resources, data always resonates really well in having those conversations and getting things done. So both from Brandon Hall Group and Gallup pulled out just a few key statistics, like retention. There's 82% improvement in new hire retention when there's good onboarding. So when you think about people coming on board, people staying, that the first few days, few weeks have a tremendous impact. One thing, and I'm not sure if you all have seen this in your specific organizations over the last couple of years, but it's become much more common than it was in the past for somebody to have multiple offers and actually start with an organization with still an offer in hand, just to see how those first few days go. And then if it doesn't go as planned, they still have another offer. What was fascinating to me, Al and I were actually at the Josh Bersin conference earlier this year in May, and a CHRO of a large organization was talking about that. Actually, it even happened to her. She didn't mention the company by name, but she said, I actually started in an organization. It wasn't what I signed up for. And so I left too. So for those touch points to align your candidate experience, your recruitment experience with what happens on the first few days, weeks, and months on the job is incredibly important. Productivity is another huge KPI. So a lot of times, even if you're talking with stakeholders who maybe still feel like well-being squishy, which I hope fewer and fewer people are, but for those who are, productivity is always something that's a non-negotiable. Having this kind of stat that actually it improves productivity by 70% is really huge, because people can produce and actually have a positive impact on the bottom line a lot sooner and more over the long term. And finally, um, only 12% of employees strongly agree that their company does a great job of onboarding. Now, there's a little bit of play on words here, obviously, strongly agree and a great job. But when you think about those first impressions, when you think about somebody walking through your door and they're excited, like the vast majority of people, when they take on a new job, they have big hopes, they have big dreams, they want to make an impact. And so to receive that and to really maximize that is really huge. And there's some very basic things that I think we can be doing to help with that. But oftentimes people don't realize it, or oftentimes people are so busy that they think, ah, it's okay that this person doesn't have a computer yet, or they don't have an email, or that we're all in an offsite on their first day, they'll figure it out. But those moments have proportionate impact on that person's impression of the organization, and how long they're going to stay, how likely they're to recommend organization to other. Like it's really, when you think about the different moments in employees' life cycle, those are like really magnified in comparison to, hey, I've been with this organization for 2 years, something bad happened. It shouldn't have, but I've been here for 2 years. I know that this is an anomaly. I know that, whatever happened was a mistake. If it's my second day and something bad happens or something's not prepared, like I don't have the history to, say like, ah, this is forgivable.
Yeah, and if I might just jump in on that.
Yeah.
I've worked for many years formerly, I don't do so anymore, with a group called the Positive Coaching Alliance out of Stanford University. And one of the, I facilitated workshops for youth and high school coaches, parents of young athletes, as well as young athletes themselves. And one of the things that came through our curriculum is this reality. As a coach, you never know when you're going to make a lifelong impression on a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And you just don't. And the same is true of parents, and same is true of leaders. And, frankly, same is true of people to people. So if you miss these opportunities, I can tell this story, and I'll just do so very briefly, the short version. I remember in San Francisco, I had, it was before I went to Russia. I lived in Russia and Ukraine for 5 years in the late 90s. And this Russian woman boarded the bus and put in a $20 bill in a bus. And she felt really embarrassed. She thought she was going to get change back. And I stood there and I didn't know what to do. And I got off on the next stop, and that was my stop. But I really wish I had given her 20 out of my wallet to ease her angst and just help her settle at that point. And given my international experience, there have been opportunities where people have been really kind to me, and it's meant the world to me, particularly in a very stressful situation. So how can we as individuals, but also as employers, in a systematic process, if there's the risk of anxiety, why don't we consciously create processes and activities and actions that reduce anxiety and elevate confidence and trust in these good things? And not doing that is just missing an opportunity, like I did. That story haunts me. So anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that point.
Yeah, I love that. And oftentimes, like for you, you were also like self-aware. You knew, hey, I wish I would have done this. Sometimes people don't see it, right? Like, so we mentioned working remotely. If I'm in my home and I'm comfortable with something, nobody can see me. Like somebody really needs to proactively ask me. Maybe even if I was in an office, someone would be like, oh, this is terrible. I can't, but like maybe I would still, quietly be sitting there. Maybe somebody would notice my face, maybe not. But more often than not, we don't know unless we ask, because the situation is not necessarily as obvious as you said, where you would think, I wish I would have done something or can do something at that point. And so that's why this kind of dialogue, I think, especially at the beginning, before somebody is necessarily maybe as comfortable to raise their hand and say something, because they think I'm brand new. Maybe it's not the company, maybe it's me. Am I understanding this differently? Maybe it's not just the right place. That's why those dialogues are that helpful, because best case scenario, everything's okay and we don't learn anything. But more often than not, there will always be something, because there's that opportunity to get to know somebody better. And so here, we just made a few recommendations on key times and themes to ask. Now, one of the best practices, depending on how big of an organization you have, how many people you're onboarding, but 7, 30, 60, 90 days, different things happen, right? First 7 days is those first impressions. Do you have the things that you need? 30 days is still very fresh and very new to make an impression. And then 60 and 90 days is more the integration in the organization. Now, if you're looking at me and you're like, Sonia, my friend, like, I would love to do all of this, but to me, it's not really reality today. The two areas that I would recommend you focus on are the 7 and the 30, because those are those really formative moments. Now, here, we just recommended a few themes. We'll follow up with all of you to understand what are your key areas of focus. And if you're saying onboarding, we'll share some more measures with you, because we're not saying that after 7 days you should ask 4 questions, or after 30 just 3. These are just some of the examples, but examples on themes that are the most important at that point, like appropriate training. Hey, I'm brand new here. Is somebody actually helping me? Are they showing me what I need to do? I have access. I mentioned computer. We would probably all be shocked to see how many times somebody doesn't have a laptop on their first day. Like, it is just the reality of still putting somebody in the system. Where does it have to travel? Did we call the right person? Um, Overall, the sense of the onboarding. And you'll see that in both, we talk about team members, we talk about those relationships, like, that I meet the people I'm going to be surrounded with. Maybe, if you're in person, a lot of times lunch was common. If you're not in person, still having an opportunity to talk with the people, because now all of a sudden these are the individuals that you're going to spend your time with. And this is probably who you're going to tell, like, your friends about, your spouse about, your kids about, like, as you start the new job, like, wow, I met Al. What a passionate guy. I feel like I'm going to learn so much from him. I'm so lucky that we're on the same team. And then also using those similar concepts as you go through the days, and as you go through the process, and saying, okay, now I have a good working relationship. Not only did I meet the people, but I feel like we have a pretty good dynamic. I know what my performance objectives are. So there's still really big misses to set expectations on truly how are you going to be measured? What are you expected to do? Of course, those conversations happen in the hiring process. That's why the person's there. When you really get down to the nitty gritty and you're saying, okay, it's been 30 days, do I know what to do for the next 30? Am I really clear on that? And then finally, things like, I'm glad I took this job, that can give you more of a high level sense. Now, again, there are a lot of different nuances and questions you can ask, but just generally, as you're thinking about the onboarding, these were some of the ones that we reflected on that are really important categories to be following up on and digging into.
Yeah.
Al?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. And
Yeah.
again, as is consistent with me, sometimes it's two things. As you're talking, what's coming up for me is the notion of employee experience. What type of experience do we want to create for our new hires? And
Yeah.
what we're referring to, of course, talks to those who have recently been promoted, or not even maybe promoted, just changed roles, either in a totally new role or something that maybe is just a nudge from what they've done. These practices can still be employed, and asking them how they're doing and providing them resources. I just want to call out Rob Cross, Michael Arena, Greg Pryor, and their work in Sendezo. It's really impressive when you can think about how to engage this systematically to not only build relationships with your team, but that second layer set of relationships, the more the casual relationships that also matter. Again, it's about a community at the end of the day. It's not just one or two relationships. It's like, do I feel connected to this organization? And organization has different layers to it from the individual perspective. So that's number one. The other thing, when we talk about employee experience, and it really just dawned on me here in 2022, is that many talking about employee experience, we're talking about the technologies in which employees were engaging with to maybe be onboarded or interacting with the organization ongoing. Others are talking about employee experience as being, okay, what it's like to interact with other people, whether it be a supervisor, peer group, or set of direct reports, or just colleagues in general. Both are true. And so both dimensions need to be considered when we consciously craft experiences and deliver on that promise that you were talking about before. But, again, what I find that is happening in the world right now is many organizations are talking the talk, but they have not taken the time, created the space, and have, frankly, the discipline to consciously create what you're talking about here, over these, different stages. And I don't want to be cynical and call it like laziness or lack of capability. It just really takes time and space and thought. And I don't see as many organizations, particularly in the small to mid-market and upper mid-market, creating that time and space, having the governance processes and getting this done and nudging it and learning systematically on an ongoing basis. So there's, again, that's why I say we're at a 2, 3, or 4, given where we are going to be over the next couple of years.
No, and that's part of the reason why we share some of the more business data, the productivity data, because when you're asking for resources and saying, I want to do this, but I need help with it, generally that kind of, the more information you have that'll resonate with the budget holders, the more of a chance you have to actually get the resources that you need to do the things that you want, to your point. Another thing, we'll just touch on this quickly, but it's empowering employees. So we talked about, managers, who are all the different people that can take action on the data. And I shared this out at the PFAL Connect in Austin when we were there, and very intentionally asked workers across the US this very long question, that if your employer asked you to help with an initiative that would help improve how much you enjoy working there and how fulfilled you feel, how likely would you want to participate? So it's not any initiative. It's not like, hey, if your employer would ask you to help, would you? Well, with what? I'm really busy. I don't know if I have time. So if it's something like we said before, you do the work, you understand what's important to your employees, and then you decide on initiatives for that, 66% of people said, absolutely, I would help. And so when we think about, again, being in an HR people department feeling alone, there are much better ways to engage our workforce to really get a lot more people making a change. So I just wanted to leave you with this data. Ask your people. More than likely, a lot of them are really willing to help, especially in initiatives that they feel will be important to them. So
and if I can jump in real quick. So
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, because I know we're coming up on time. But I will say engaging your workforce, extraordinarily important for reasons that you just cited. I will also put out there that there's room for what I would call discontinuous innovation in terms of employee experiences. In other words, if you have something that is audacious, that, hey, we are going to have a growth mindset here as an organizational culture. I'm not going to ask permission for the employee to say that, or respect is non-negotiable and this is what it's going to look like. They might not come up with that, but leaders have to make decisions and oftentimes make bold moves and be prepared to deliver against it. So involve, absolutely, for reasons that you just cited, but also leave space to do something audacious and wonderful.
Absolutely. And kind of going along the lines of what you're saying with being audacious and making bold moves is to also think about things as experiments. So this is one, I attended another conference when I was in Austin, and a lot of people talked about experimenting with different initiatives. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. And I love that, because I think it's another way of thinking about, where we'd say before, don't be afraid to fail, don't be afraid to fail. But the word failure in itself is like, I don't want to fail. But
it's
if you
learning.
reframe it, if you reframe it as learning, if you reframe it as an experiment, take those bold moves and have the mindset that's like kind of what I sandwich in between. Go into it believing not everything's going to work. Know that it doesn't, because in life it doesn't. But to not try that, not to test that, not to look at those areas and experiment and iterate and learn would be a huge mistake. And if you go into the mindset saying that if you learn something from it, even if that initiative didn't work, that's a huge success, I think you're going to be more open to trying different things and seeing what works. And Al, to your point, there are bold things to do. And the world around us is changing sometimes faster than we can wrap our head around it. Some of those big, wild ideas are what's going to help a company really set apart. And again, if it doesn't work, it's okay, because it's important to try different things. It's important to set yourself apart. And when if it doesn't work, you'll learn from it and you'll try something different. But I think the status quo today will take us back, because as everything's changing around us, status quo today will not give you the same impact as status quo tomorrow or next week. It's actually going to be worse.
Yeah, and I know we're coming up on time, and so I'll let you get
okay.
through the final points. what you're saying leverages the key takeaway from Adam Grant's book, Think Again. Think like a scientist. And embedded within that is you're going to have learning experiences that don't deliver in the intended way. And now you either adjust or you bail on it, but we have to have that learning or growth mindset. And if we don't, to your point again, status quo is a decision in and of itself. And it means that you are consciously ignoring the changes that are happening in the external environment and the changing feelings and behaviors that are happening within your own organization. So, that's just, again, it's irresponsible. I'm in a position where I can say that, but that's my belief. So keep learning.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Couple of last slides. We don't have too much content left. So checking in. Al, you were mentioning this before, and Guy and I created this funny, like, over-surveyed employees can't take it anymore. Crisis continues. Like, this is fake. This was not really in the news, but it's a lot of what we heard from companies when they were surveying their employees. They said, our employees have fatigue. We can't act in the data fast enough. They're saying they're frustrated because we're asking them things and we can't take action on it. And that's why, again, going back, this is the exact same slide from before around choosing themes and measuring those themes and getting feedback on specific areas that are important in your organization, more so than doing monthly surveys or quarterly pulses, is what's going to be critical. And who cares if it happens a month later, 2 months later, 3 months later? Measure the things that are important to your organization, to your people, and your employees will not be fatigued, because it'll give you information that you are already actioning, that you can action, that will energize you and will not frustrate your employees that you're asking them things and not acting on them. And it won't frustrate you that you're trying really hard and you have this information that you don't have time to do anything with, and in turn are disappointing your workplace. So that's just the one, the one around check-ins. Really simple, but really, really think about the content, think about the concepts, think about the initiatives much more than the frequency of the cadence. Because your employees won't think about that, they won't value that, they will not hold it against you. But when you're systematically checking in and measuring the things that you promised and that you are delivering on and fine-tuning them and continuing that dialogue on things that make a difference, they will not be tired of hearing from you. I promise you that.
100%. And I'll just quick example. If I don't feel respected at work, then that can change within hours, maybe days, and it should. As soon as that insight comes, it's like, tell me more about this. How do you not feel respected in this group? And shift. That could take literally hours, not days. That's a quick. If it's performance management processes and systems, that's a heavy lift. But it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the appropriate questions, being very thoughtful about what you're asking and making sure that if you're asking frequent questions, that you can deliver on the change over that intermittent time frame.
Yeah.
So 100% agree.
Absolutely. And I think just one more slide or 2 more slides, exit interviews or exit surveys. So this is something that we saw a big spike during the Great Resignation, especially at the beginning of the year, end of last year. And I thought, okay, that's important to do. Please talk to your people while they're still there. Don't do just exits, because you don't want to only grab information on the way out. But this data I literally got today, and it floored me. So we asked, do you feel like your last employer knows the true reason you left the company? And I was like, a bunch of people are going to say, no way. 68% of people said yes. Like, they said yes. But then, so this was the kicker. I was like, wow, okay, that's high. Even if there's some margin of error, that's still high. Then we asked, when you left your last job, did you get an exit survey or interview? And 73% of people said no. And so I thought, oh no, wait a minute, wait a minute. So these individuals are actually telling someone, probably their direct manager, why they're leaving, but this data is not being systematically collected anywhere. So as an organization, if you have systematic pain points, you have no idea what to solve, because all of this knowledge is most likely with these direct managers. Like, that to me is a huge missed opportunity. So actually this, like, literally hot off the presses opened my eyes to, oh my goodness, please give your employees an opportunity, if you're not, to share this information. And maybe even if not, the 68% will take the survey or share that. If a fraction of this does, like, you'll have so much more company-wide data that you can understand what's going on that you do today. Like it'll absolutely be valuable.
And I'll just highlight the point that there's a host of assumptions out there that say, oh, if we do exit surveys, then they're not going to give us true responses anyway. The manager knows why, and they're entering. That's not the case. And there's data and insight research that shows that that's not the case. So have the discipline and rigor to do the exit surveys by HR, not the immediate manager, and make sure that you're getting that data. And we can talk about doing it post, exit, but that's tricky for a variety of reasons. So, but just have a process to grab that data, because to your point, it's immensely valuable if the process is structured properly.
Absolutely. And so for the sake of time, we'll share this after some of the examples of exit questions. And again, we'll be following up with you to understand your specific needs. And so what do I do now? As a wrap up, some of our recommendations is choose your area of focus for Q1 and H1. Ask for volunteer employees and or your organization to help you. Again, I can't iterate that enough, because I think based on what the global economy is doing, probably most of us will not get extra help. We might more than likely have to do with who we have. And so how do we maximize that time? Make a commitment to yourself that each initiative is an experiment. So again, to Al's point, the thinking again, the really learning, finding value in that is incredibly important. And then if you found value in this, again, we'll be reaching out to all of you that were on this call to understand where you are in your journey. Is there anything that we can do to help you? We'd love, like Al was saying, a two-way dialogue. So to understand what each of you are going through in your specific journey, what are you focusing on? And then we can tell you a little bit more specifically around what are, some of the ideas of what you can do. But it helps us tremendously in all of the research that we do and all of the conversations that we have to understand what's going on in the market, to really truly understand what's going on with the people who are focusing on this in their roles day to day. And then, as always, please connect with us. This is me, Al, our contact information, our emails, our LinkedIn profiles. So if you're not a friend already, please do reach out. We do a lot of different chats. We share a lot of different content. Both he and I are so passionate, again, to learn and then to give back to the community what those learnings are. And so we'd love to get to know you if we don't already. We'd love to continue with that dialogue. We'd love to keep you posted on any of the things that we're doing next and involve you as well in a part of the different communities and the different conversations.
Amen.
Al, thank you so much for everything today. It was
Sam.
such a pleasure to have you as a part of this conversation. For all of you that joined us, thank you so incredibly much for your time. End of the year is always wild. There's so much to do. So thank you for the incredible work that you do. Thank you to the commitment to making employee experience, employees' lives better, and for joining us today. And we hope to see you all again soon. Take care, everyone.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.